frame our work through the lens of research creation because it allows us to experiment and theorize about the implications of working across media, disciplines, and geographical borders, and to interrogate how knowledge is produced, how and by whom. We have developed a series of interactive art projects that investigate and foreground the histories, roles, and experiences of women, of self-identified women through reactivation, remediation, and reenactment. And in CMAS, we interrogate women as a category of analysis with a complex history and not as a fixed gender or sexual identity. So as background to my collective practice, I would like to share some highlights of my individual practice that consisted of a series of art installations through which I investigated the female body, or my body specifically, as a site of cultural, gender, and biopolitical inscriptions, or in other words, on how the body acts as an archive of all our experiences and how in turn we embody and enact those experiences in our daily lives. So some of my early video works explored how historical narratives shape the construction of our own identities and how we carry them in our bodies. And so what we are looking at here is La Coyolxauhqui, or the Prelude to the Fragments, which is one of the pieces I developed as part of my MFA exhibition in York University in 2001. And it's a 7-channel video installation inspired by the story of the Aztec goddess La Coyolxauhqui, who was killed by her brother Huitzilopochtli after he learned that she wanted to kill him. And so after Huitzilopochtli killed her, he threw her body down a mountain, and her body is dismembered. And that's the monolith of La Coyolxauhqui as it was found underneath the Cathedral of Mexico City in the late 80s. And I was very interested on this story, very gender story of betrayal and misplaced alliances within a family, but also how it's been told and retold as a way to construct gender identities in Mexico. And so in this project, what I do is I perform various actions that have to do with the way I was learning to be another person through the English language. Mostly like Alexandra and Elena talked, it's a very similar experience. And I was like opening an English dictionary and touching it and putting ink in my body. And so the piece also formally is about a reflection of how a fragmented female body in relation to the ways in which we live fragmented lives, and we have multiple roles and we play them constantly. And so in a similar vein, a couple of years later, I started thinking about landscape and land and memory. And so this is a piece I created at the Redhead Gallery where I reconstructed the Valley of Mexico. I built some walls, and then I embroidered by memory the contour of the volcanoes Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl, which are in the Valley of Mexico, and that's where supposedly Hernán Cortés met Mexicas for the first time, but it's also a very gendered story of one volcano being active and the other inactive. And so, I drew the contours with my hair in the wall. So flash forward a couple of years, I was very interested in history, so I ended up doing a PhD program at UBC in the history department, where I investigated the practices of a group of artists and feminist activists who began to question how feminine bodies were visually construed and politicized across media. And so I wrote a dissertation that was turned into a book, first in English and now in Spanish. And to develop this project, I spent over a year traveling and doing research in Mexico City between 2009 and 2010, where I visited various institutional archives and also interviewed several artists who were very generous and opened up their homes and shared with me their family archives and their own archives. And so these women included Mónica Mayer, Maris Bustamante, Magali Lara, Ana Victoria Jimenez, Rosa Marta Fernandez, and many others, and also the archives of Paula Weiss, who's deceased, and she's in the cover. So this was an immensely rich experience, which made me question, again, what an archive is, who defines it, who decides what to include. And mostly it led me to explore archival practice as a methodology of feminist research creation, centered on an engagement with the recovery of political memory through reactivation, reenactment, and remediation. And so I really was inspired by my experiences in Mexico City, and one of the greatest experiences I had was to work with Mónica Mayer and Karen Cordero in the project Memora, where they employed reactivation as a form of feminist curatorial practice. And so Mónica Mayer is a feminist artist based in Mexico City, and Karen Cordero is an art historian also based in Mexico City. And so they were organizing a series of intergenerational workshops with artists and university students to raise awareness on the historical value of the archive of Ana Victoria Jimenez, who is a photographer and who's not been recognized as a photographer in Mexico, and who photographed all the demonstrations, feminist demonstrations in the 1970s and kept the ephemera. And as a result of their workshops and the visibility that they gave to Ana Victoria Jimenez archive, the archive is now available at the Ibero University and for everyone to research. And also the responses of this young artist are included in the archive. So building from the 1970s activist tradition of collective organizing and small group or conscious raising groups, Mayer and Cordero's approach seeks to reactivate historical memory by creating intergenerational encounters between diverse people to question what constitutes an archive and also who can be an agent of an archive, and what is the political relevance of an archive that is not considered as such as Jimenez. So in other words, reactivation for Mayer and Cordero is not only a tactic to bring awareness to the historical value of an archive, but also reinserting the archive in the present, making it a living archive, and thus just turning historical memory into political memory in a matter of social justice. So taking inspiration from Mayer and Cordero, I began to work with my own family archives thinking about Walter and Rusin's idea of remediation as this logic by which new media always refashions older media. And so I invited several colleagues of mine and friends to respond to a cookbook that was written by my great-grandmother, and that they could respond to a recipe in the medium of their choice. So Mama Pina is my great-grandmother, and she was born in Guadalajara, and she began to write recipes in this notebook around 1918. And then the notebook was handed down to my grandmother, Gabriela, and her twin sister, Teresa. And they continued to write stuff and getting instructions and cooking, and then to my mother, another Gabriela, all of whom continued to use the book, and all the children on those households continued to write doodles and smear the pages of the cookbook. And so it was kind of a very interesting material object of my family. So I sent a selection of 25 recipes to 20 people via email without translation or transcription, as I was living here in Canada. And the responses I received included digital images, audio recordings, videos, documentations, and even photos of other people's archives. So the project consists of four channels of video. The first channel, you see myself trying to copy or imitate the handwriting style of each of those women. In the other video, my mother is telling me how to make one of those recipes via Skype, because it was a long time ago, 2015, there was no Zoom. And then the second video is I am drawing a map and trying to locate the responses of the people that participated in the project. And the fourth video is an open channel where you can write by using a stylus pen or a mouse, and you can write on it. But the idea is that after 10 seconds, your writing is going to disappear, because I was also very interested in thinking of the unarchival properties of any archive, or how there's always something excluded, or how there's always something that we forget, which is always a good thing too, right? It can be a good thing. So reflecting on how this recipe book was in fact an archive of sorts, in which 3 generations of women in my family had recorded instructions on how to cook, but also about feminine rituals and traditions. In this project, I really reflected on the role of women as agents of the archive, and expanded Mayer's and Cordero's notion of reactivation by exploring the processual and performative qualities of the archive through digital remediation. And what you see here is a website also that is part of the project, and you can have access to all the cooking recipes, and it also shows the videos in a different format, as you are seeing right now. And so this led me to look at these theories of archive that are really interested in the performative forms, the oral traditions, and how the performative forms are always in tension with recorded forms. And Rebecca Schneider and Diana Taylor have written a lot about it. And so this led me to explore the reenactment to further investigate the tensions between the archive of supposedly enduring materials, texts, bones, buildings, monuments, and the so-called ephemeral repertoire, according to Diana Taylor, of embodied practices, oral traditions, dance, sports, cooking, and rituals. So in another project, I started thinking about reenactment, and I'm really fascinated by this concept of reenactment as defined by Tony DeFrance and Gustavo de Frutado, who are performative scholars, who define reenactment as a disturbance in the perceived linearity of time, whereby through corporeal repetition, the past gains a ghostly simultaneity with the present. And every repetition harbors the possibility of difference, and also the possibility of giving the past other futures. And I find that really fascinating, the idea of giving another future to our past. And so here with my friend Sarah, we collaborated in this reenactment of Brazilians, Lydia Clark, really famous DI, the You Clothing, Body Clothing. And we did a recreation of this piece by incorporating artificial intelligence, ours using AI tools to interpret this experience. I am extending myself too much, but I'm gonna be really fast. These are more current projects because the incorporation of artificial intelligence custom tools has led to a series of collaborations in which we use the female body now inscribed by the lived experience of childbearing. So I'm thinking how childbearing as a metaphor to reflect on how the female body can be an interface between self and other, and another human being, but also all the parasites and microbiomes and all kinds of organisms that live within our body, and that has led me to investigate bioart. And so in this more recent project, which is a 3-channel video installation, again, we are cultivating bacteria from our skin and feeding those images through AI and creating tools or filters on ways to modify the image in order to think about our relations with non-humans, both machines and microorganisms. And then the last series is mitochondrial ontologies, deep time and the digital, where we are actually employing the concept of the mitochondria as a metaphor to the possibility of tracing maternal lineages of human and non-human bodies across time to reference more deep and historical information flows across bodies, machines, and organisms and geographies. We're collaborating with a team of 10 artists to develop a live performance and a generative video installation that connects us again to this older geological times where unicellular organisms and establish a symbiotic relationship with other multicellular organisms to then evolve into the human. So through this project, we continue to explore a longer temporality of care, to care and co-create with each other, to continue to think jointly through the possibilities of reactivation as a call to action that seeks to intervene in the present through the reactivation of political memory, through intergenerational and creative engagements, of remediation as a critical engagement with the so-called newness of digital technology, while exploring the ways it can facilitate communication, but also reproduce long-standing systems of oppression. And finally, of reenactment, precisely as an invitation to stage embodied encounters with others to envision new futures for our past, And lastly, another venue of collaboration that I think it's going to be very interesting for me for the next panel, because I'm really interested in sound art, involves current research with sound artists across Latin America who are interested in the capacity of the sonic as to build intersectional, affective, and supportive networks of solidarity. And this is one of the recent installations that we created. And lastly, I'm gonna just show all the people that I collaborate, because I couldn't tell all their names. So thank you.
Nicole, to slide me to the right screen. I know you did something. Okay. Yeah, so also thank you to the organizers of LAMAS, Nicole, my fellow panelists, Gabriela and Zaida, for including me in these rich and critical conversations on Latin American media art. You know, a topic that we all think about a lot. So it's an honor to be here with you all in Toronto. I traveled with my family from the Coast Salish territories, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations to share some recent work. More specifically, I'm going to be discussing an exhibition I co-curated with Tamara Toledo at Sword Gallery, and how the project came about and some of its conceptual underpinnings in a desire to contribute to generative discussions on Latin American media art. And as I did a curated tour earlier today, where I spent time talking about each artist and artwork, my focus here will be more on some of the origins and ideas of the exhibition. So hopefully there won't be too much overlap for those of us joining for both events. So what became this exhibition, Diaspora Dialogues, Archiving the Familiar, currently on view at Sword Gallery until December, has been a journey that starts with archives of early Latin American video art from the 70s and 80s. And it's a journey that has contributed to a philosophy on archival practices by thinking through what constitutes archives, what do archives do, what do they mean to me as a researcher, filmmaker, educator, and curator. And I've been asking myself what it means to not only work with archives, but to remediate them while creating new archives. And when we remediate archives through film, through art, through an exhibition, we're ultimately producing a new archive and also a contemporary experience. So every time we open archives, our experience and interpretation of them is essentially mediated by our present moment and specific context. So how does that renewed experience of the archive activate our imagination of whatever archive we're interfacing with and its indexical history? And I was just thinking with your example of Mama Pina's cookbook, you know, again, every time we sort of remediate it and look at it, you know, what is that contemporary experience? You know, for me, it made me think of, one of my grandmothers who couldn't read or write, but was an amazing cook. She had 10 children. She shopped and cooked for everybody. So yeah, it kind of activates, you know, these other memories and experiences. And what does it mean when we, you know, reactivate our archives, especially when we're talking about feminist and Latin American and diaspora media histories and futures? So, yeah, so there are many journeys that led to having all of the artists and their artworks come together in dialogue in this exhibition. And perhaps in terms of a bit of an origin point in this journey, we could say it started in 2019 when Casey Way, who was then Vivo Media Arts distribution manager. Vivo Media Arts is a Vancouver media arts center. She reached out to me to share that I may be interested in an archive of Chilean videos during a similar period to Brazilian feminist video artists who I had previously written about with Gabriela and who had personally inspired me as a media artist. Sonia Andrade, Anabela Geiger, Letícia Parente were video pioneers in Brazil in the in the 1970s during this particularly repressive dictatorship era from 1964 to 1985. So when Casey Way reached out to me, I was moved by this archive of Chilean videos housed at Vivo that were also done during the US-backed dictatorship era in Chile. So this research in the archives and having the privilege of working with and learning from scholars like Gabriela Sepúlveda and community leaders like Carmen Rodriguez and newer artists like Soledad Muñoz, who's a part of the show as well, was the beginning of what eventually became a documentary film project. So briefly, from Chile to Canada, Media Histories is in 2022 is a project I did in collaboration with Sonia Medell in partnership with Vivo Media Arts and generously funded by the Canada Council for the Arts and BC Arts Council. And I started this film journey that took this intergenerational approach to thinking about the role of Latin American media art in Canada and its legacies. So the exhibition continues a line of inquiry that looks backwards and forwards, witnessing how political memory is carried through time in a present moment of pandemics, climate emergencies, and social historical reckonings. So this exhibition runs in parallel with the screening in partnership with Vivo Media Arts of early works by Chilean and Brazilian artists who were using video to denounce the violence of the US-backed dictatorships in their respective countries, as well as other forms of violence against women. So these videos document performative acts of protest, as well as documentation of the feminist movement and protests against the dictatorship. So I'd like to show a very short clip from this archive that inspired the film and is part of our online curation, launching October 1st through to November 4th. So that was a clip by Lottie Rosenfeld, one of the artists who came to Vancouver in 1987 as part of an exhibition called Women... Is your mic working? I don't know. Is the mic working? We can hear you. Oh, okay, good. Called Women Art in the Periphery. Partly curated by Sarah Diamond at Vivo. Dr. Gabriela Seves has done extensive research and scholarship on these particular videos, and in our interview with her, she helps analyze and contextualize the works while making connections to what was happening in Latin America, in Canada, and globally. So I'd like to show a short clip from the film that somehow led to this curatorial project.
The story of the people that stayed, for those of us who lived the daily grind of, being kids in Chile during that time. Those films that you guys have, those videos, represent that time, a time of great silence. That's why I was so surprised when I saw this footage, the factories, the police, the street, the women, the fashion, potentially forgotten material. But it is the foundation of a new society that's emerging in Chile, that those artists created the pillars for what's happening today.
And that exhibition had not only the impact that it had at the moment that it was being shown, but it had a long-term impact. One of them was that a few of us Chilean Canadian women met with Gamela Altit when I invited her for onces, for tea time. And from that conversation, the idea of a magazine.
So I'm going to show some documentation of the artworks currently on view at Sur, although I won't be talking individually about the artworks, but more generally about ideas on these relationships between diaspora and archives. So Stuart Hall explains in his seminal text, Constituting an Archive, how remediating an archive in a new work builds, and I'm quoting, a relation among past, community, and identity. And these artists are dialoguing with these various contested terrains of what it means to be in diaspora, what it means to use technology to mediate data as part of exerting agency over their stories and archives. And digital remediation becomes a strategy for these women artists to reclaim not only what constitutes an archive, but also who gets to safeguard the archive. So Hall's framing of diaspora archives is relevant to understanding how the exhibition Diaspora Dialogues evolved from diverse histories, community engagements, and activisms, and intermedial processes. So the exhibiting artists are not only artists, they are scholars, activists, educators, mentors, community organizers, mothers, daughters, sisters, aunts. And showing work in a gallery is really a small part of the many things that they do. So the way these artists approach archives is a method, and I'm quoting the Brazilian scholar Luciana Najib on intermediality, when she says that it's a method strategically poised to shed new light on the ways in which, in this case, archives, not only represent, but also interfere with and transform the world around it. So I would argue that artists transform the worlds around them through mediated forms, as do these artists. So Tamara and I had conversations and were interested in how the artists in this show, Amanda Gutierrez, Soledad Muñoz, Cecilia Araneda, Gabriela Sepúlveda, and Rosalina Libertad Cerritos, create artworks that make visible the living political memory of diaspora through diverse media art languages, manifesting diverse approaches to the archive as a site of interpretation, contestation, and negotiation. So here, the archive is personal, it's familiar, it's familial, it's political, gendered, fragmented, embodied, and living. And we're interested in how the exhibition as a whole, both the physical installation of artworks at Sur and the online screening through Vivo Media Arts, creates a dialogue between original culture and copy, this idea of doubling of places, the passages and slippages between past and present, here and there, mother tongues and adopted tongues, all foregrounding the fluidity and porousness of diaspora identities and ways of being as dialogic. So this movement, through time and space, is reflected in these works and in the notion of the archive as something unfixed, in flux, fragmented, and fragile, but also the archive as malleable and open to possibility. And I think it's this malleability, the negotiability, kind of open space for a reclamation of the archive, a reclamation of data and information from historically excluded perspectives. So while the artists have their own distinct symbolic languages and universes, their distinct subject positions, their formal methods of approaching the archive, experimental film, interactive installation, sound sculpture, weaving, I do see overlap with thematic concerns of the archive as a site to articulate diaspora histories, experiences, and knowledges. So this intergenerational dialogue and relationships between original culture and copy, those living in Latin America and those living in diaspora, I would argue that there is an active transfer, but one that flows from south to north and north to south in horizontal ways. Many of us journey back and forth and collaborate between geographies. And generationally, I'm thinking about the conceptual strategies used by early Latin American conceptual artists of the 60s and reflected in the works of the women artists making videos in the 70s and 80s as part of our programming at Vivo, and how these contemporary artists' symbolic universes are influenced by their Latin American art predecessors and contemporary counterparts who never separated politics from art. So here, politics, autobiography, and archives coexist. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello? Does it work? We cannot hear it. I think the reference is in the back. Thank you very much for your presence here today. Thank you for the invitation, Sinara, Nicole, Sara, and Gabriela. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Art History and Film Studies at the Université de Montréal, or Jogjaga, an unceded indigenous territory of the Kanyankehagas and the nation of the Haudenosaunee people, the Longhouse Iroquois Confederacy. What a pleasure to be here in Takaronto, treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit and traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat Confederation. I am privileged to visit and learn from this ancestral place. My presentation today is titled Diasporic Archives, Interstitial Circulations, Latinx Canadian Cinemas in Toronto and Montreal. Because I claim that it is through interstitial practices and translocal networks, such as those formed by small festivals and alternative film exhibition spaces, local cinemas, non-profit organizations, and self-distribution strategies, that Latinx Canadian cinema and filmmakers develop and implement new forms of existing and archiving within and beyond Montreal and Toronto's film cultures. The exchange of knowledge and practices in audiovisual archiving is increasingly global in scope. Notions of imperfect, decolonial, exilic, interpersonal, non-institutional, orphan, and accidental archives are permeating recent debates on memory, reparation, film heritage, restitution, and the need to recognize and avoid practices that perpetuate paternalistic or colonial hierarchies in terms of forms. In the case of filmmakers in the diaspora, I seek to explore how to overcome, for example, the double silencing of exiled and refugees films and filmmakers, when not only the institutions of the countries of birth do not encourage the cultural return of their diasporas, but also mainstream institutions in the host societies show no particular interest in safeguarding these cinemas. Archival inaction as a possibility for preservation is also part of complex debates in memory studies today. Regarding management, is the ideal fate for these films to be homed in personal repositories and continue to find audiences primarily through curatorial programs and projects? In terms of ethics and skepticism towards institutions, what forms of sustainable repair and care good organizations that are often clear examples of white supremacy, such as the so-called LAMAS, galleries, libraries, museums, and archives, offer to living archives? Should filmmakers in the diaspora trust them with their work? These are some of the questions that guide my incipient research on Canadian Latinx Latinx Canadian film production, circulation, and archives. We're working on a book right now with Sarah has a chapter. I'm co-editing with Analyze Alvarez Hernandez and Gabriela Sepúlveda, called Diffracting the North, Latinx Canadian Film, Media, and Visual Arts. Our community, of course, does not escape the unstable living conditions of these diasporic populations, of other diasporic populations, often marked by the precariousness and even absence of secure repositories for their films. And even if the raison d'être or la raison de ser of film programming are the films themselves, I am very interested not only on the materiality of cinema, but also in the programs conceived, curated, and coordinated by Latinx Canadian filmmakers, scholars, and programmers. Meant not only to repose in an enclosed place, but also to go out into the world, archives inspire curatorial action in the same way that curation generates archives. But the latter phenomenon is still significantly understudied. Michaela Alessandrini explored these questions in her volume, Curatorial Archives in Curatorial Practices, where contributors promote curation, not only as a resource for objective research, but also as systems or structures where individuals and collective methodologies and curatorial visions are set out, intertwining the curator's private life and professional practice in a record of creation that includes all the necessary ingredients to generate a memory and allow future generations to feed upon and add to it. This is particularly relevant when curation is counter-archiving alternative sources, which allow telling counter-narratives that conventional archives do not. Or when curators use a method of dissent that borrows from epistemic responses to colonial archives. I claim that diasporic archives are crucial in these counter-narratives, and their potential can be realized, as Anne Svetkovich claims, when the archive is expanded to encompass our ordinary lives, sexual practices and cultures, ephemeral experiences, and alternative institutions. That's why I'm interested in the idea of a living archive. Many of the experience of watching a film program is not only the films or the program that we read, the materiality of it, but how the film interpels, like affects the viewers. So drawing from these conceptual explorations, I seek to analyze the mobilization and creation of autonomous, self-managed film archives through curatorial gestures that have accompanied between filmmakers, and to recognize the work of this complex and heterogeneous social group made invisible both in the countries of origins of these filmmakers and here in Canada, or made with the need of further or of more visibilization, let's put it that way. Perhaps the most important contribution of this research is the recognition that the ephemeral nature of otherwise inaccessible film programs makes the resources of small-scale film festivals and gatherings of this type central to preserving the memory of events and the communities that participate in them. So curated by Jorge Lozano, Ricardo Acosta, and Sinara Rosso, this 1995 program included 72 short films from 250 entries, among them Latin American, Latinx films made in the US, Latinx Canadian, and Latin American diasporic filmmakers based in other places in the world. For the programmers, the main intention was, and I quote from the works in the catalog, to showcase and share with all Canadians a selection of films and videos that celebrate the growing Latin American presence in Canada's cultural mosaic. They also recognize the need to, again, cross borders and include the work of Latin American artists from all the Americas, in capital letters. This inclusive and expanded understanding of Latin America claimed that Toronto is Latin America too. What is that? And used Cuban anthropologist Fernando Ortiz's allegory of the ajiaco, or soup with multiple ingredients, at the center of this transcultural experience in two senses. Ethnocultural, on the one hand, as it was an invitation to transcend borders of all kinds and reflected the creative legacy of artists of Arab, African, Asian, Jewish, European, indigenous, and mestizo cultures. Formal, on the other hand, as it included everything from experimental and documentary films to soap operas and video clips or music videos. The currency of this program, the political stance of the curators, the scope of the film's themes, geographic origin and genres are at the least invitations for further and deeper analysis nowadays. These archives incite questions such as, where are these films or filmmakers today? Many of them are active right here in front of me. Who attended the events? What were the main discussions? How would it be to recreate this program three decades later? Among the selected works, there were short films by Brazilian Sandra Kogut, incredible filmmaker, Argentinian Jorge Laferla, experimental filmmaker, Cubans in the diaspora, Sergio Giral, Coco Fusco, Carmelita Tropicana, based in New York, a sample of the work of students from the first generation of the International Film and Television School of San Antonio de los Baños graduates, including Venezuelan Mariana Rondon, who later directed Pelo Malo and other films, as well as Latinx filmmakers in Canada, Claudia Morgado, Marcos Arriaga, Jorge Lozano. And a key figure, there is even, I think you can see Bolero Falas right there. I think that might have been Jorge's idea. It's an incredible song, an extraordinary music video. So really very eclectic in terms of programming, which is amazing. And there was also a film by a key figure of this Latinx boom in Toronto in the 90s, Ramiro Puerta. Puerta worked as a programming advisor for Crossing Borders, But already in 1993, together with a Chilean filmmaker, Maria Teresa Larraín, he made a call for the first National Conference of Canadian Latinx filmmakers to propose common solutions for a group that lived, as Jessica Retis puts it, in the interstices of invisibility. Puerta and Larraín realized that due to the isolation of Latinx Canadian filmmakers and artists resulting from linguistic, cultural, and racial discrimination barriers, especially new immigrants did not have access to and even were unaware of the networks and resources available in arts, community, and cultural funding organizations, which prevented them from doing their creative work. The meeting was held in the autumn of the same year and gave birth to the Southern Curtains Collective, which organized short film screenings of 95 and 97. Ramiro's archives are hosted today at the Chief Reference Library. His films had been in his family's personal repository for over 20 years. Although the pandemic delayed the momentum around the filmmaker's material, in 2023, very recently, the collection was finally inspected and appraised, which contributed greatly to understanding its current state. It contains materials related to Puerta's programming work at TIFF, as well as to his filmmaking career as the director of this trilogy of films, Crossroad from 1994, Two Feet, One Angel from 1997, and Topic of Cancer from 2001. The archives include 51 items considered to be moving images, and 19 celluloid films, including also 35mm transfer to VHS, Super 16mm color negative transfer to U-Matic, and master video recordings on Betacam SP. I would like to end with an initial reflection on the Encuentro Nacional de Cineastas Latinos Canadienses that took place in Montreal in May of this year, almost 3 decades after that first encounter. The curatorial gesture that accompanied, that's it, that accompanied this gathering sought to highlight the work of Latin American diasporic filmmakers in Canada through a chronological map that allowed us, I think, to historicize these productions and establish meaningful connections both in our broad heterogeneity and in our shared histories of border crossing, displacement, adaptation, and integration. Though necessarily limited, the selection of films shot in various languages in their countries of origins, in Canada, in the countries of origins of the filmmakers in Canada and elsewhere, attempted to include the filmmakers' relationships to their roots and routes, new and old. 9 Latin American countries were represented in 13 short films that moved aesthetically between the performing arts, dance and video art, experimental, documentary, and fiction. Entitled Trailblazers, program number 1 showcased the efforts of 4 foundational artists who established the presence of this ethnocultural community more than 30 years ago and whose legacy is crucial. We saw the work of political refugees such as Marilu Malet, the Peruvian director of the Grupo de Cine Liberación Sin Rodeo in Peru, Carlos Ferrand, who's Montreal-based, the feminist filmmaker, now Vancouver-based, Claudia Morgado, whose film Unbound received the Teddy Award for Best Queer Film at the 1995 Berlinale, and of course Ramiro Puerta, to whom his friends and colleagues paid tribute, who screened Crossroads, his first short in the trilogy. Program number 2. Oh, that was it, program number 1. Program number 2. New Generation celebrated a group of filmmakers who started to work in the 21st century and included pieces that express complex relationships to the place of origin or homeland, other Latin American countries, and other diasporic communities in Canada. In general, they address issues as diverse as systemic violence, ethnic diversities, women's bodies, transgender activism, indigenous sovereignty, biracial couples, family trauma, and the challenges of migration itself. Sarah was part of that program. Putting these programs together involved coordinating venues and negotiating with distributors. We had to work on subtitles for a film spoken only in French. It was an inaccessible film it was made in the 1970s for so long. It was an inaccessible film for Spanish and or English speakers. So we had to work on subtitles, and we screened some films with poor image and sound quality. because of the conditions in which the archives find themselves. So at the meeting, we realized the following, and I'm about to finish. The community is still scattered, isolated in their niche Canadian territories and languages. Many filmmakers do not know each other or their work in the diasporic independent film scene. Some do, many don't, and that's great. That's why we're here. The historiography of Latinx Canadian cinema is neither studied nor systematized. Many participants had no idea of the events held in the 1990s, which is why at the beginning this event was advertised as the first national gathering of Latinx Canadian filmmakers, now rebaptized the first of the 21st century, because there was one in the 1990s that nobody had written about enough. Community film archives must be found, repaired, managed, and shared responsibly. Urgent work is required to remediate and mobilize them for their visibility, study, recognition as heritage of Latin American and Canadian cinema. Many of the same problems discussed 30 years ago remain the same. In a country without national quotas for movie screenings, distribution is still a huge challenge. The historical disconnection, the lack of references, the great distances. Canada is a huge country, the second largest in the world. The different linguistic, Quebec is another nation. Climatic and cultural ways in which the migratory experience is lived in Canada and the generational divides between filmmakers have an enormous potential to generate difference of opinions while enriching everyone's perspectives. The transnational conditions of these creative practices of migrant filmmakers should bring expansion rather than limits. In that sense, festivals should program films, and this is something we debated a lot during that encounter, during that meeting. Festivals should program films in a broad sense and not define them in terms of genre, duration, nationality, and other factors. These rationales are constraining, predispose viewers, and limit exhibition possibilities, particularly in film festival. And that's what I think, why I think the 95 and 97 events are extraordinary in the program, because of that eclecticism that allows us to see beyond all of these limitations. Some filmmakers find their place of belonging closer to other communities, queer, Black, and other migrants, than within the Latinx Canadian community that strives still for cohesion and organization. Nevertheless, for most participants, I want to say for all participants, these spaces are excellent ways to meet, reconnect, reinvent themselves, be present, be heard, expand community networks, find wider audiences, encourage future collaborations, and increase solidarity. Despite the unavoidable omissions of these kinds of events, curation is very complex and as much as archives, because it creates them, includes and excludes. I think that both projects, the one from Audiovisual Heritage, Diasporic Archives in this case, to help shape cultural memory and reclaim screen for our subaltern community, to rescue and recount stories and practices marginalized or absent from official narratives in both Canada and Latin American film histories. In her book, Chic Flicks, Ruby Rich points to the role that friendships and collaborations, these interstitial one-on-one relations, play in the production of academic knowledge, and how effective and bodily ties to festivals and festival film goers are archived. It is thanks to these affective networks that we can begin this historiography, all of us. Thanks to Ricardo Acosta, editor of Ramiro Puertas Films, who showed me all the precarious digitized copies. I was able to see all of Ramiro Puertas' work. Thanks to Jorge Lozano, who via WhatsApp provided the archives of the programs that I have just shared with you today. Thank you to Sinara, who has sustained these festivals for so many years, so we have a platform. To my artist colleagues, who are pushing the boundaries of academia by exemplifying through the research creation that creativity and scholarly work cannot and should not be divorced. So to all of you who are part of this effective network, thank you. Thank you. I'll leave it there. I'm happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you for the presentations. I think since we started a little bit late, we have 15 minutes for Q&As. So we're happy to pass along to the audience if they have any questions about the projects and presentations?
Thank you for a fantastic and inspiring. I think we're all kind of awestruck. We don't have any questions. Like, we're processing this amazing, amazing work. So I have a very simple question as a result, which is, when we think about archives, is there information on the internet about the May 2023 gathering? Can we find clips? So maybe you could, and is there any place where is the original catalog digitized? Is that available anywhere on the internet? So I'm just saying, like, I just love being able to come back and be able to rethink some of this. And the same for the other two. I know this is going to be an online program. And Gabriella, all the work you showed, is there a web presence for it? So I guess I'm turning it back to that.
Okay, I'm gonna start, and that's the complexity, but also the beauty of interstitial, like translocal connections that give us a little bit more agency. All the program, it's in ceciliananeda.ca, like it's in her website, because she got a grant, invited everybody, got everyone to Montreal, and kind of coordinated that with, of course, local actors. I was there as the programmer, but she worked with a group Intervention Video, I think ADAX, La Maison de la Culture, so other organizations. And then she kind of closed the event by saying, okay, off you go, like the ball is now on your court, who's next? So I guess it's gonna be in madipilers.com, like, or in Jorge Lozano's. The next gathering will be wherever the next artist chooses to if they can, or if they are funded for it, or if there's an interest. So it's really it's a meeting that can change cities, and it needs to, that can change programmers and curators and organizers. So right now, all the information is in Cecilia Araneda's webpage, because she was the person who coordinated this one. The ball is on our court.
In terms of all the work that I showed, it's available on the website of the Critical Media Arts Studio. But what Zarza points to it's a really important comment that these archives are based on individual people's website, that who knows who owns the server, and what's going to happen in the future with this kind of work that's available on websites. In my case, it's part of my studio and my research, so I have a space at SFU. I don't know for how long, but it's there. It's there, and I usually try to create websites and post the videos on, in the web, so people can watch them. Although I'm not very well at tagging and making it unpublicize it, so it's still very hidden. So that's why I like to show it this way. So you could see that I showed videos of how to navigate on the websites. So.
Sorry, thanks. My question is more a follow-up about what you were saying, Gabriela, and just the interplay between erasure and archival. Yeah. So because even digital archives, they occupy a very physical space. Yeah. So it was like, I want to know what would be like archival strategies that are ethically, ethically, something like that. Ethically environmental? I don't know what is this first one.
It's a great question, and I think there's a lot of conversations about the cloud not being really the cloud, right? And having all those farms, servers of farms, and occupying so many resources, right? Electricity and space, but we don't see it. So we don't see it, then we think that it's not occupying space. And I mean, there's two things that I can mention that I know from colleagues that are really researching this thing. One is in terms of archiving, there's a problem with platforms and technology that becomes obsolete. So many are keeping paper copies. Or actually more material, or film. I mean, although film, I'm not a film scholar, so yeah, but in terms of things like that. But there's a lot of colleagues that are, remediating and digitizing. There's other problems with protocols, right? You cannot have everything preserved, and not all communities want everything to be preserved. With indigenous communities and even with family archives, right? There are things that you don't want to give access to everyone, and we really have to think about those ethical protocols, and I'm particularly very interested in this anarchival quality of the archive and our need to know everything, and how that need to preserve and know everything also is part of our patriarchal, wanting to have access to everything, but sometimes we can't. Not everyone can have access to everything, and we have to be respectful of that. Those are the kinds of things that occur to me.
It's like because it's a little confusing for me. Because you're connecting diasporas with archiving, and I imagine, just for clarifying myself, when you are opening an archive, you are generating new diasporas. That's the idea. Because according to Boris Royce, that's what we do. Just for me. I don't know if everybody. Because sometimes it's complicated to understand what is the relationship between one concept and the other concept. Is like, how, I'm clear. I don't know. It's just for me.
Yeah,
I don't know.
No. I mean, I think they're both very loaded, complicated terms that have so many people have written so much about archives and so much about diaspora, and it's not a simple answer. And we all have our own interpretations and stuff. So I think that's very valid to, frame it the way you framed it. And we're trying to, exploring some of these connections of what does it mean to connect these two things. And
because that is what I saw when you were presenting, like making like a tree, you know what I mean? Opening an archive and then making like a petic, how do you put petic, when you put the bacteria in...
Petri dish?
Yeah.
So, when you open an archive,
See, thank you for such an insightful, interesting presentations. I'm sorry I was late. We won't see these close on the others. But we are archiving everything. We are really trying to edit as much as we can to upload all of these into the aluCine video channels. So for whoever couldn't attend or were late or interested in revisiting these conversations, they're gonna be up. Not entirely, but at least some experts from. And second is, it's really interesting how we're closing today with this panel, and at the beginning of the Latin American Media Symposium, we were talking about archivals as well, and the problem that we face with, especially festivals, with the actual physical space that all these films that we have been carrying since 1995, and that I refuse to trash. So I have to actually rent a space to store all these, but we don't have any like heating control or anything. That I think all these things are getting fried or burned or cold, so I don't know. But it's really interesting what you guys are talking about archivals within archivals, how to re-access and kind of revitalize and rescue all these programs from the past. I'm really interested to continue these conversations, and maybe we can do something about it. Thank you so much.
Just sorry, babe. Maybe you can get a really big grant and invite artists to reactivate the archives.